let me tell you something that might make you uncomfortable. Your emotions are lying to you. Not all the time, and not about everything, but far more often than you'd like to believe. That surge of anger you felt when someone cut you off in traffic? That wasn't rational assessment of danger. That was ancient wiring designed for a world that no longer exists. The anxiety that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning? That's not protecting you from real threats. That's your brain overreacting to imagined scenarios that will probably never happen. Here's what nobody wants to admit. We've been sold a story about emotions that's fundamentally wrong. We're told to trust our feelings, to honor our emotions, to let them guide us toward authenticity and truth. And yes, emotions contain valuable information. But treating every feeling as sacred wisdom that must be immediately acted upon? That's not emotional intelligence. That's emotional slavery. Think about the last time you made a decision you regretted. What was driving that choice? I'd bet money it wasn't careful reasoning or strategic thinking. It was a feeling. You felt angry, so you said something cruel. You felt anxious, so you avoided an opportunity. You felt excited, so you made an impulsive commitment. And afterwards, when the emotion faded and clarity returned, you looked at the wreckage and wondered what you were thinking. The answer is simple. You weren't thinking. You were feeling. And you mistook that feeling for a command that had to be obeyed immediately. Now, before you think I'm suggesting you become some kind of emotionless robot, let me be clear. Emotions are part of being human. They're essential. They connect us to others, they signal what matters to us, they add color and meaning to our lives. The problem isn't having emotions. The problem is letting emotions have you. Every single day, you're faced with a choice. Will you respond to life based on how you feel in the moment, or will you respond based on who you want to be and what you're trying to create? Will you let a temporary emotional state dictate permanent decisions, or will you acknowledge the emotion while choosing your response based on something deeper? This choice determines everything. Your relationships, your career, your health, your sense of inner peace. Because here's the truth that changes everything once you really understand it. Between what happens to you and how you respond, there's a gap. It might only be milliseconds, but it's there. And in that gap lives your power. In that gap, you can choose. Most people never discover this gap because they've trained themselves to react instantly. Something happens, they feel something, they act on that feeling. Stimulus, emotion, reaction. Over and over, thousands of times a day, reinforcing neural pathways that make emotional reactivity more and more automatic. But what if you could slow down that process? What if you could feel the emotion fully, acknowledge it, understand what it's trying to tell you, and then choose your response based on your values rather than your impulses? What would change in your life if you had that kind of control? Let's start with understanding why this is so hard. Your brain has a built-in alarm system called the amygdala. Think of it as your personal security guard, constantly scanning for threats and ready to sound the alarm at the first sign of danger. When your ancestors encountered a predator, this alarm system saved their lives by triggering instant fight or flight responses. No time to think, no time to analyze. React now, survive, think later. The problem is your amygdala can't tell the difference between a hungry lion and a critical email from your boss. It treats both as existential threats, flooding your system with stress hormones, shutting down your rational thinking, and preparing you for physical battle against dangers that don't actually exist. And here's what makes it worse. Your amygdala learns. Every time you have an emotional reaction to something, your brain files that information away as evidence that the situation was actually dangerous. This means you're training yourself to be more reactive over time, not less. That colleague who annoyed you once. Now every interaction with them triggers defensive reactions. That social situation where you felt awkward. Now similar situations create anxiety before you even arrive. Your brain is literally building a catalog of things to be emotionally activated about, and it's using your own reactions as evidence to expand that catalog. You're teaching yourself to be triggered by more and more things, and you don't even realize you're doing it. But here's the good news, and this is where everything changes. Your brain is also incredibly plastic. The same mechanism that's been training you toward reactivity can train you toward control. Every time you feel an emotion and choose a thoughtful response instead of an automatic reaction, you're building new neural pathways. You're weakening the connection between feeling and reacting, and strengthening the connection between feeling and choosing. So how do you actually do this? How do you create that gap between stimulus and response when your emotions are screaming at you to act right now? It starts with a simple 4-step process. Stop, breathe, observe, proceed. When you notice yourself having an emotional reaction, the first thing you need to do is stop whatever you're doing. If you're typing an angry message, take your hands off the keyboard. If you're in the middle of an argument, close your mouth. If you're about to make an impulsive decision, step away from the situation. This physical stopping sends a signal to your brain that you're taking control. It interrupts the automatic reaction pattern. And yes, it feels awkward. Yes, there's a moment of discomfort. But that discomfort is infinitely better than the lasting damage of saying or doing something you'll regret. Next, breathe. Not just any breathing, but deliberate, controlled breathing that activates your body's calming system. Breathe in slowly through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out slowly through your mouth for 6 counts. That extended exhale is key because it triggers your parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the stress response. Do this at least 3 times, but continue for as long as you need. You're not trying to make the emotion go away. You're trying to restore enough rational thinking to make good decisions. Your heart rate slows. Your muscles relax. The fog of emotional intensity starts to clear. Now you can observe. What exactly are you feeling? Not just bad or upset, but specifically what emotion is present. Are you angry? Anxious? Hurt? Frustrated? Disappointed? The more precisely you can name the emotion, the more power you have over it. Because when you label an emotion accurately, you activate the thinking part of your brain and reduce the intensity of the feeling itself. Also observe the situation objectively. What actually happened, as opposed to your interpretation of what happened? Someone didn't respond to your text. That's a fact. Your interpretation that they're ignoring you or don't care about you. That's a story you're telling yourself. Separate facts from interpretations, and you'll often find that your emotional reaction was based on assumptions rather than reality. Finally, proceed. But not by jumping back into action. By consciously choosing your response based on your values and goals. Ask yourself what response would be most aligned with the person you want to be. What response would create the outcome you actually want? What response would you be proud of tomorrow, next week, next year? Sometimes the best choice is no response at all, at least not immediately. You might need more information. You might still be too activated to respond wisely. The situation might not actually require any response from you. And that's perfectly okay. Other times, you'll choose to engage, but differently than you would have if you'd reacted automatically. Instead of defending yourself, you ask questions. Instead of making accusations, you express how you interpreted their actions. Instead of trying to win an argument, you try to understand their perspective. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds exhausting. Do I really have to go through this process every single time I feel something? And the answer is no, but also yes. At first, yes, it requires conscious effort. You're building new habits, and new habits always feel effortful in the beginning. But here's what happens with practice. The process becomes faster and more automatic. Eventually, you'll catch yourself before you react, not after. You'll notice the early warning signs of emotional activation and implement your control strategies before you do any damage. And eventually, your default response to challenging situations will be calm and thoughtful rather than reactive and impulsive. Think of it like learning to drive. At first, every action requires conscious thought. Check the mirror, signal, check the blind spot, turn the wheel. It feels overwhelming because you're managing so many things simultaneously. But after enough practice, all of that becomes automatic. You don't think about it, You just do it. Emotional control works the same way. Right now, it might feel like a lot of steps and a lot of effort. But with consistent practice, responding wisely becomes your default mode. The gap between stimulus and response gets bigger, and using that gap becomes second nature. Let me tell you what changes when you develop this skill. Your relationships transform. Because you're no longer saying things in anger that damage trust. You're not withdrawing in hurt without communicating. You're not escalating conflicts unnecessarily. You become someone people can count on to stay steady even when things get difficult. Your decision-making improves dramatically. Because you're not choosing relationships based on intense feelings that burn out quickly. You're not making career moves based on fear or impulsive excitement. You're not spending money because you're trying to soothe uncomfortable emotions. Your choices align with your actual values and long-term goals. Your stress levels drop. Because you're not constantly dealing with the consequences of emotional reactions. You're not cleaning up messes you created when you lost control. You're not lying awake regretting things you said or did. You're not carrying around anxiety about how people perceive you after your outbursts. And perhaps most importantly, your self-respect grows. Every time you choose your response instead of reacting automatically, you prove to yourself that you're in control. You demonstrate that you're capable of being the person you want to be, not just a slave to whatever emotion happens to arise. But let's talk about what this doesn't mean, because there are some dangerous misconceptions about emotional control. It doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending they don't exist. Suppression is just another form of being controlled by your emotions, except instead of expressing them destructively, you're stuffing them down until they explode or eat you alive from the inside. True emotional control means feeling your emotions fully while choosing your actions wisely. You acknowledge the anger without acting on it destructively. You recognize the anxiety without letting it paralyze you. You notice the hurt without weaponizing it against others. It also doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. Some people fear that controlling their emotions means losing their passion, their warmth, their humanity. But the opposite is true. When you're not constantly hijacked by reactive emotions, you actually become more present and connected with others. You can listen better because you're not preparing your defensive response. You can love more deeply because you're not guarded against potential hurt. You can engage more fully because you're not managing constant emotional turbulence. Think about the people in your life who you most respect and admire. Are they the ones who are constantly emotional and reactive? Or are they the ones who stay calm under pressure, who respond with wisdom instead of impulse, who can handle difficult situations with grace? I'd bet it's the second group. That's because emotional control isn't weakness. It's strength. Real strength. Not the performative kind where you puff up your chest and pretend nothing affects you. But the genuine kind where things do affect you, you feel the impact fully, and you still choose your response based on wisdom rather than reactivity. Now let's address the really hard part. What do you do when the emotion is so intense that all your rational strategies fly out the window? When you're so angry you can't think straight, so anxious you can barely breathe, so hurt you want to lash out and cause pain? This is where preparation becomes crucial. You can't develop emotional control skills in the middle of an emotional storm. You develop them during calm periods so they're available when the storm hits. It's like learning to swim. You don't wait until you're drowning to figure it out. You practice in safe, controlled conditions so the skills are automatic when you need them. This means building daily practices that strengthen your emotional regulation capacity. Start your day with 5 minutes of breathing exercises or meditation. Not because you're currently upset, but because you're training your nervous system to maintain calm. Throughout the day, practice noticing your emotions without immediately acting on them. Oh, I'm feeling frustrated about this. Interesting. What's that about? Exercise regularly, because physical movement processes emotional energy and builds resilience. Get adequate sleep, because exhaustion makes emotional control nearly impossible. Eat in ways that stabilize your blood sugar, because hunger and nutrition affect your mood more than you realize. Create environmental supports for emotional regulation. Identify your triggers and develop specific response plans for each one. When this person criticizes me, I will pause and ask a clarifying question instead of defending myself. When I start feeling anxious about a presentation, I will use my breathing technique and remind myself of past successes. Build relationships with people who model good emotional regulation. Because you literally absorb the emotional patterns of the people you spend time with. If you're constantly around reactive, dramatic people, you'll become more reactive and dramatic. But if you spend time with people who stay calm under pressure, their patterns will influence yours. And here's something most people never consider. You need to practice emotional control during low-stakes situations so it's available during high-stakes ones. If you can't manage frustration when someone cuts in line at the coffee shop, you won't be able to manage it during a critical negotiation. If you can't control your reactions during minor disagreements with your partner, you won't be able to control them during major conflicts. Every small moment is practice for the big moments. Every time you choose control over reactivity, you're investing in your future self. You're building the skills that will serve you when it really matters. Let me share something that might shift your entire perspective on this. Your emotions aren't actually telling you about the world. They're telling you about your interpretation of the world. The situation itself is neutral. Your brain assigns meaning to it, and that meaning triggers an emotional response. This is incredibly empowering once you understand it, because it means you have much more control than you thought. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you interpret what happens. And when you change your interpretation, you change your emotional response. Someone criticizes your work. You can interpret that as a personal attack and feel defensive and angry. Or you can interpret it as useful feedback and feel curious about how to improve. Same event, completely different emotional experience, based entirely on the meaning you assign to it. Someone doesn't invite you to an event. You can interpret that as rejection and feel hurt. Or you can interpret it as them not thinking of you in that context and feel neutral. Your partner seems distant. You can interpret that as evidence they're losing interest and feel anxious. Or you can interpret it as them being preoccupied with work stress and feel compassionate. The situation doesn't determine your emotion. Your interpretation determines your emotion. And your interpretation is something you can influence and eventually control. This brings us to perhaps the most powerful truth about emotional mastery. When you're no longer controlled by your emotional reactions, you become almost impossible to manipulate. Think about it. How do people control others? By triggering emotional reactions and then taking advantage of those reactions. They make you angry so you'll act impulsively. They make you anxious so you'll seek their reassurance. They make you guilty so you'll comply with their demands. They make you excited so you'll make hasty commitments. But when you can feel all of these emotions without being compelled to act on them immediately, their manipulation tactics don't work. You feel the anger, acknowledge it, and choose a strategic response. You notice the anxiety, recognize it as manufactured, and proceed calmly anyway. You observe the guilt, examine whether it's warranted, and make decisions based on your values. You experience the excitement, take time to think it through, and commit only after careful consideration. This doesn't make you cold or calculating. It makes you free. Free to respond to life based on who you want to be rather than reacting based on momentary feelings. Free to build the relationships, career, and life you actually want instead of constantly managing the consequences of emotional reactivity. And here's what's beautiful about this journey. Every single day gives you dozens of opportunities to practice. You don't need special circumstances or perfect conditions. Every frustration, every annoyance, every moment of anxiety or anger or hurt is a chance to strengthen your emotional control muscles. The person who cuts you off in traffic. The email that triggers defensiveness. The comment that stings. The situation that creates anxiety. These aren't obstacles to your development. They're the training ground. Each one is an opportunity to practice feeling fully while choosing wisely. So here's my challenge to you. For the next week, commit to one thing. Every time you notice yourself having an emotional reaction, pause for just 10 seconds before you respond. 10 seconds. That's all. Count to 10, take 3 slow breaths, whatever works for you. Don't try to change your response or fix anything. Just create that small gap between feeling and reacting. I guarantee you'll be amazed at how often that small pause changes your entire response. How many arguments you don't start. How many messages you don't send. How many impulsive decisions you don't make. That 10-second pause is where your power lives. And once you've practiced that for a week, extend it. Make the pause longer. Add the observation step where you identify exactly what you're feeling and why. Start choosing responses based on your values rather than your impulses. Build the habit of emotional control one conscious choice at a time. Because here's the truth that nobody can escape. You're going to feel emotions. Lots of them. Strong ones. Uncomfortable ones. Overwhelming ones. That's part of being human, and it's never going to change. The question isn't whether you'll have emotions. The question is whether those emotions will have you. Will you be controlled by chemical reactions in your brain that were designed for a world that no longer exists? Or will you acknowledge those reactions while choosing responses based on wisdom, strategy, and the person you're committed to becoming? The choice is yours. Every single moment of every single day. And the beautiful thing about that choice is that it gets easier every time you make it. You're building neural pathways, strengthening mental muscles, developing capabilities that compound over time. A year from now, you could be someone completely different. Someone who stays calm under pressure. Someone who responds with wisdom instead of reacting with impulse. Someone who builds strong relationships because people know they can count on you. Someone who makes better decisions because they're not driven by temporary emotional states. Someone who experiences deep inner peace because they're no longer at war with their own feelings. Or you could be exactly where you are now, still controlled by your emotions, still dealing with the same patterns, still creating the same problems. The only difference between these two futures is the choice you make right now, and the choice you make in the next moment, and the next. Your emotions are not your enemy. But they're also not your master. They're messengers carrying information, and once you've received the message, you get to choose what you do with it. That choice, practiced consistently over time, determines everything. So start now. Not tomorrow. Not when things are less stressful. Not when you feel more motivated. Right now. Because every moment you wait is another moment of lost opportunity to build the skill that will transform every area of your life. The gap between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives. Step into that gap. Own it. Use it. And watch everything change.